Hello, my name is Mark Rossner. I'm a technical marketing engineer with Cisco's UCS group. I'm going to look at UCS Manager maintenance policies, a bit of review, and also focus on the new UCS 3.1 on reboot feature of maintenance policies. The whole point of maintenance policies is deciding how to deal with changes to service profiles that require server reboots. Once again, only changes that require reboot are in question here. Other ones don't apply to this feature. Now, if I have a change that affects only a single service profile, you might say, what's the big deal? Of course, I'm just not even going to make the change until I halt the server nicely. Then I can make the change in UCS Manager and then boot, and that's fine. So the whole issue here is, of course, okay, I have an updating service profile template, and I may have 50 service profiles, and I want to make a change that would require reboot of all those service profiles. That's an issue. Or even worse, I have a policy that's used by many service profile templates that then is used by many service profiles, and I might want to change the policy and have it apply to some service profiles or to new service profiles that are about to get instantiated from the templates, but I have an issue about rebooting all of those service profiles. We'll see how that works with maintenance policies. Starting in UCS 1.4, maintenance policies were invented. So a maintenance policy typically is applied to a service profile template, could be directly to a service profile that doesn't have a template. And we have these settings for the policy. Immediate is just the default action as if we didn't have a policy, as if it were pre-UCS 1.4. If the maintenance policy has the user act setting, then when you make changes through a policy or a template that require service profile reboot, those changes don't actually occur per service profile. They become pending. If you just halted and rebooted the service profile without doing anything else, those changes would still not be made. They would still be pending. Instead, you need to explicitly acknowledge per service profile that you want to apply the change. If you were doing one service profile at a time, you'd still typically halt that service profile, then acknowledge in UCS Manager that you want to apply the changes on reboot. The other possible setting is schedule. You can set up one-time or recurring schedules where UCS automatically tries to apply changes to some or all of the service profiles. You can say, I want to do groups of 5 service profiles, X number at a time. But still, if I just went to an individual service profile and happened to halt and reboot it without UCS applying the automatic schedule or you manually doing the acknowledge, you still wouldn't apply the changes. The change would still be pending for that service profile. So starting in UCS 3.1 with those user act or timer automatic settings, then I can add this on reboot option if I want to, so that no matter what else, if there's pending changes and I go to a specific service profile and halt reboot it, it will auto acknowledge the change for that service profile, and we'll see it in the live demo, and the change will automatically get applied and removed from the pending list for that particular service profile. So that makes a lot of sense and is probably something we want to take a lot of advantage of. Okay, here I am in the new HTML5 GUI. I personally will never go back to the old GUI. As I said, my demo will involve 2 service profile templates. Here it says Linux iSCSI boot and Win2KR12 iSCSI boot. 4 service profiles that are instantiated from those templates. And the change that requires reboot that I'll be talking about is a LAN and iSCSI connectivity policy. Right now it shows a standard 2 VNICs, an A and a B, and an iSCSI VNIC that I happen to be booting off of. Going back, I'm first demonstrating these service profile templates completely out of the box, where they're using a maintenance policy down here named default, which has its setting completely out of the box immediate. which will make behavior as if there were no such thing as maintenance policies pre-UCS Manager 1.4. You can always see the existing maintenance policy assignment and the settings, so I can see I'm using the one named default and the setting reboot policy immediate behavior. Any changes will immediately reboot service profiles. I happen to have my 4 service profiles with consoles open just to show you the default behavior. Now there's only 4 in the real world. Before I make any changes, I may reboot them nicely or halt them nicely and make changes and boot them. But this is just a demonstration. If I just change something that requires a reboot, here for example, if I delete a VNIC that requires a reboot, before I commit it in the GUI, so once again, before I do the equivalent of commit in the CLI, it reminds me that it's going to cause the immediate reboot of these 4 service profiles. Are you sure you want to apply the changes? And just to demonstrate, if I say yes, okay, it does try to reboot these OSs nicely. You'll see, there go the Windows. There go the Linux service profiles. It will reboot them in order to make the change that requires a reboot, and they would come back up with only 1 VNIC instead of 2 because I modified the policy. Let me go back to the UCS Manager and either modify the maintenance policy or create a new named maintenance policy. I'll just do it that way, just to be more official in a way. So let me create a maintenance policy. Let's call it Mark Policy. Once again, if I left it this way and then assign this policy to my service profile templates, I wouldn't have changed anything. Let me change it to user act. So this is behavior that you've been able to do since UCS 1.4. I'll leave this on next boot unchecked, so I'll get the behavior that was required with the user act maintenance policy since UCS 1.4 until 3.1, and then we'll look at this on next boot later. Of course, I need to not only create the maintenance policy, I need to assign it to my service profile templates. So let me change maintenance policy and assign mark policy, and you also see the values down there. Let me make the same change for the other template. Last time I deleted a NIC. Let me add a NIC this time. Okay, nothing happens until I click Save Changes. Notice the warning is different, and it says will require user acknowledgement before the reboot of the 4 service profiles. So this is where the state gets interesting. Notice I have warnings about these pending activities in several places. I'll get back to that in a second. And what's interesting is if I look at my service profiles, it looks like these changes have been made, although the changes are actually pending separately on each service profile. On the General tab for the service profile, if there's pending activities for that service profile, then I have a chance to acknowledge which says Reboot Now. Of course, if we were doing individual service profiles, the whole idea is I may be better off halting nicely that service profile. Then, in this example, I would still have to acknowledge the change in order for the next boot to incorporate the change. The other way of seeing these changes is in this pending activities, and it shows a list here of all 4 changes. Unfortunately, it doesn't list the names of the service profiles here. I'm not exactly sure why it lists the name of the physical server. And each individual one or multiple ones at a time I could reboot. Though even if I halted it nicely, which might be more likely on a service profile by service profile basis, I'd still have to do this acknowledgement in this interface in order for the change to take effect in the next reboot. Let me just do one of these. I will let it reboot the system for me. It'll still try to reboot it nicely just to show, rather than do it through this interface where I'm not even sure which service profile is which. I'll go over here and acknowledge the change on this one, and this will actually apply the change. It's showing me there's a change in this list. Now there's only 3 pending activities left. Show you that in a second. over here was the service profile that I chose, and it's doing the reboot for me. So this one comes back up, and the change should have been applied, and it sees two interfaces in Linux. Now the behavior until UCS Manager 3.1 is that even if I do decide to halt and boot this service profile that has a pending change that has not yet been acknowledged, the change still won't be applied. So this is where the shortcoming was, where the enhancement in UCS Manager 3.1 is going to help. Because of course, if I reboot this service profile and it has a pending change in configuration in UCS Manager, why not just pick it up at this time? I might not have remembered to go click the button in UCS Manager that says apply the pending change. I would just like it to get applied because I happen to reboot. And just to prove that, this one, even though it rebooted and it had a pending change, it still only has one VNIC, and the pending change isn't going to be applied. I'd have to remember, and once again in the real world, is to halt it nicely and then go to UCS Manager and apply the change. Now I can apply the change, which it says reboot now. I already halted it nicely, but that would take the change out of the pending mode for this particular service profile and actually apply it. Let me just quickly look at the timer feature of maintenance policies. This has been around also since UCS 1.4. So if I were to change this to say timer automatic, so that I have the system still automatically apply some pending changes and reboot some service profiles. What this can be really good for is large pools of service profiles where you will allow the system to reboot some of them or reboot some of them at the same time. In order to look at this timer automatic, I have to look at these schedule objects. Here I have a nightly application of pending changes, if there are anyone. Here I've named it Kira Nightly. And I have a recurring occurrence here that says every day at, here, this example, 2:13 p.m. But here's where you might really use these things. Okay? And what it says is maximum that are going to be applied on any daily cycle is pending changes to 2 service profiles and only one at a time. Now in this example I have 4 service profiles, so the first day that it hit this interval at 2:13 p.m. it would do 2 of those service profiles, only one at a time, and then it would wait until the next day to do another 2 service profiles, one at a time. So I could control for larger pools of servers where it's okay if I lose some, and I might not even care which ones I lose, but I still might like to control how many reboot at the same time and how many reboot every day or whatever the interval is. So let me go back to the maintenance policy and say I want to use timer automatic. I'll still leave on next boot unchecked in this example and pick the Kira Nightly schedule. I'd still have to go refer to the schedule. Okay, so if I made this change, I'm not going to show it again. Then at 2:13 p.m. it would reboot 2 of the service profiles, one at a time, and then wait till the next interval tomorrow at 2:13 p.m. in order to do the other thing. But the same caveat, and we didn't even have the option until UCS Manager 3.1, where this on next boot is unchecked, which is the way it had to be. There wasn't even an option until UCS 3.1 that if I did come across a service profile and halt it nicely and reboot it, but I neither applied the changes manually with the pending activities window or the pending button on each service profile. Okay, but if I did none of that, I just rebooted the system, it still would not apply the changes. And then finally, I get my enhancement, my beautiful enhancement for UCS Manager 3.1. I'm not sure precisely why I wouldn't choose this button. Let me go back to User AC and then pick this button. Notice I'm using the same named maintenance policy that's already associated with my service profile templates, so I won't have to change the templates. It'll just automatically pick up the new value in the policy. and I'll just do user ACK, but say if I happen to reboot any individual service profile, at that time it'll automatically pick up the pending changes and apply it as well. So let me save changes here. Back to my example change that was affecting both templates and both service profiles, and back and delete this VNIC. And it says requires user acknowledgement before the reboot, but in fact, because if I have this on boot button checked, if I happen to just reboot one, it'll pick up these changes. Well, just come and reboot one here. Let's see what it says. Notice I have this message, server is in maintenance mode. And you're like, oh yeah, there must have been a pending change for this server. So here we are. And yes, even though I didn't explicitly apply the change, I just manually rebooted. The change did get applied. There's only one VNIC left. There's only 3 pending changes for 3 different service profiles left, etc. And the same behavior would be if I click the on next boot behavior for timer automatic, so that if I did a manual acknowledgement or the automatic timing happened to do that acknowledgement for me for the service profile, or I just manually did a reboot, it would automatically get picked up. Thank you for listening.